Thank you for being here and joining us. A warm welcome on this very cold day. We would like to make very short a few announcements about the evening. First of all, we would like to welcome in particular Father Ed Hoon. Thank you for joining us and being the guest speaker at this November TheoBar. Father Hoon is going to have a presentation. He's going to be speaking for 30 minutes, and then this will be followed by a Q&A. So please prepare your questions. And we would like to also inform you there is a list for all. I see quite a few new faces. There is a list that's going to go around at the end. Please, if you would like to get our monthly invitation and be aware of the place, the location, the person that's going to speak, please put your name and your mail address. There's also a hat that's going to go around. This is because we are a charity. We would very appreciate your generous donations. This helps us for printing flyers. It's just to cover the cost. And please, we are also here thanks to the generosity of Bateau Ivre, so we try to compensate by drinking heavily. And now, without any further ado, I would like to present our guest speaker for this month, Father Ed Hoon, who is a missionary of the Redemptorist congregation. He is a priest with the International Parish of Luxembourg, and has been well-traveled. I think you've been to Scotland before, if I'm not mistaken. And many other countries. And today you are going to help us answer a very, very difficult question, because it's very pragmatic, and it's something that we're constantly, at least I know I am, struggling with, which is the question, what does it mean to be a Christian witness in our today's life? I would like to give you the floor to help us figure this all out. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Hello. Thank you very much to the committee for inviting me. That's okay? Yep. Hello. I'm very pleased to be here, and pleased also to be talking about a subject that is very important to me, and I know very important to Christians in Luxembourg and elsewhere. I'll just say a word about my background that might explain my way of thinking. I was brought up in a Catholic family, very Catholic. In fact, we hardly knew any people who were not Catholic. The family next door were Jewish. I didn't know what Jewish was, but they were very nice, so that was the main thing. There were lots and lots of Muslims in my home city, but we didn't know any of them because none of them came to the Catholic school, not surprisingly. Then there were Protestants, and they were kind of the enemy because they went to the next school and they were different. I didn't know why at the time, but now I know a lot more. I'm wiser. I went to university, and by accident, I was in a Protestant college, very, very evangelical. The first question I was asked when I arrived was, "Are you saved?" I had no idea what they meant. I said, "How do you mean saved?" And they said, "Have you given your life to Jesus?" I said, "I don't know." And immediately they knew that Catholics were not Christians. If they had asked me, "Do you think you are going to heaven?" I would have said yes, of course, with God's help. It was a matter of language. We were speaking a different kind of language. My fellow students, many of whom are still my friends 30 years later, were very evangelical, very certain of what they believed, very Bible-based. They knew all their biblical texts, or certain biblical texts, very well. They had lots of prayer groups for everything. You didn't have any meeting without 20 minutes of prayer beforehand. And they would meet to talk about who they had brought to Christ. The whole object of their time at university, apart from studying, was to convert other people. And they had all kinds of ways of attempting this. They would have music events and then mix with those who came, trying to get them to talk about Jesus or admit they didn't know Jesus. They even, clothes pegs that you hang clothes up with, they would write a message from the Bible on a clothes peg and then go into the town and attach the clothes pegs to people's coats and things like that. So people would find this thing on their coat and there would be a message from the Bible. They did everything. This was all very strange to a Catholic. And it took me ages, it took me a long time to work out why it was different for Catholics. They were, now I don't know if this works in other languages, but there are two words in the English language. One is evangelism, and the other is evangelization. Is the same distinction in French? I don't know. Or German? Evangelism is where you try and convert individual people to faith in Christ. And this is the basis of evangelical Protestantism, in my experience. You have conversations, you challenge people, sometimes you bring them to a crisis, and the object is to introduce them to the person of Jesus Christ. The Catholic approach has always been quite different. Evangelization is to work from our faith to change the world, to change the structures, to evangelize the structures, to bring the values of God into everyday life. And it may seem a play of words, but actually, culturally, it's really important. My friends would use every opportunity to tell people they were Christian. And they'd go straight from a prayer breakfast to a lecture. They'd go from a lecture to a prayer meeting, always making certain people knew they were Christian. All the Catholics were very shy and kind of just went to Mass on Sunday and maybe said their private prayers, but didn't really talk about it. I realized what was going on years later. For my evangelical friends, it was explicit evangelism. You spoke, you named things, you talked to people about it. For Catholics, it was implicit evangelization. Implicit. It was how you lived, what values you showed, how your faith related to your life. And that difference is a bit more blurred now, but still holds true. So the question I posed, or the questions I posed at the beginning, how can we live a Christian lifestyle without annoying our colleagues, losing our friends, or being accused of hypocrisy, really goes to the heart of these two distinctions, explicit and implicit evangelism or evangelization. As Europe becomes increasingly secular in its politics and political structures, this question or these questions are becoming more pointed, more clearly stated. And the challenge is on us. Should I, this evening, be wearing my priestly costume, my black shirt, my jacket, my white collar, or my religious habit with a white collar and my rosary beads? Or should I be dressed like this, or maybe a bit smarter? But anyway, so should I be standing out so that my faith is made visible by what I wear? Or should I be more sneaky, a bit more hidden in the way I operate? Now, for me, it's not a choice in principle. I act according to my personality and according to how I have received faith. So there is no right or wrong here, either for me or for you. There are some things to note about faith. One, it is individual. between a person and Christ, between a person and God. 2, equally importantly, it is a community act. It's something that does not exist on a one-to-one between the believer and God. It exists between the community of believers that we call the church. Thirdly, faith is not the same necessarily as religious belief or religious practice. We could have rosary beads in our hands, we could surround ourselves with religious books, we could do religious things, and there might be nothing at the heart of it. We have the outward observance without the inward meaning or commitment. Similarly, the other extreme, we might have intense religious commitment, but none of it shows on the outside. And what we're looking for is balance. Balance for our own lifestyle and the milieu in which we find ourselves. Any questions so far? Stop me if I'm not being clear, or if you want me to repeat something. Okay. In the UK at the moment, it's becoming problematic, as in other European countries. France has been in the headlines recently, to wear, for example, a cross if you're working in a public forum. It's seen as oppressing other people or taking your religious liberty too far, intruding into the space of others. And the recent controversy in France about the wearing of the hijab, or wearing women particularly. All religions seem to control women more thoroughly than they control men, including our own, including Christian religion and the Catholic Church. It's in the news because people are discovering the boundaries that once existed have become more fluid. What was accepted is no longer accepted, sometimes for good reasons. What people who don't like it call political correctness. Oh, you're just doing that because it's politically correct. Well, actually, you can rename that as respecting the beliefs of others and not pushing your beliefs on them in the same way as they shouldn't push their beliefs on you. Where does this leave us? We believe. When a Christian was baptized in the early church, they took off all their ordinary clothes and put on a white garment after they had been down into the water. They were reborn. Their whole life was taken over by this new faith to which they'd been introduced. And it's important to understand it wasn't a belief in the head. They were baptized into Christ. It's as though they became a new person that was going to live in a new way and relate in a new way and have new values and seek to influence others accordingly. Then as Christianity became the mainstream religion, as Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire and continued to spread, there had to be a renegotiation. It wasn't radical anymore to be Christian. And those Christians in the 4th and 5th centuries had to find new ways of showing their faith. And it's happening again with us. If we follow the model of implicit evangelization, the first thing we do is live in Christ, knowing that Christ is in us. Jesus said to his disciples, "You are the salt of the earth." Now, what do you do with salt? You don't throw it at people and say, "Look, this is salt, take notice." It goes into the food to change the flavor of the food. So it's as though Christians are in the community to change the flavor of the community. And a community without Christians in it is impoverished. He said, "No one lights a lamp and puts it under a bucket, under a pail. You put it somewhere high for everyone to see. So the Christian changes the flavour of the community, and the Christian tries to be a beacon, a light to enlighten the community. Not with any sense of being perfect or proud, because we all know how poor we are at being Christians in different ways. Salt to the earth and light to the world. Jesus used another image, the yeast in the bread. The bread would be flat, as unleavened bread is, but the yeast changes the bread and helps it to rise, and it becomes something different. And the Christian in society is such a leaven, such a yeast in the loaf, which is the commonwealth, the community, the wider community. Do you need to talk about God at work? Do you think you should? Do you think that you're not really being Christian if you don't mention that you've been to church, that you've prayed? Someone comes to you with a problem, you say, I will pray for you because I'm a Christian and I believe prayer changes things. I think that depends on who you are. If it comes naturally with you to share your life with other people, then you would say, I had a great day shopping on Saturday. Had a great day on Sunday. We went to church. We all prayed together. We had lunch together. On the other hand, if you're a private person, it would seem really strange if you kept mentioning your religious belief. And people would think, are they trying to make a point here? Are they trying to convert me? Do you think your colleagues would notice if you weren't a Christian? Are there any values that change the way you relate at work? Are you more honest than your colleagues or less honest? Are you more hardworking? Are you more forgiving? Are you more gentle? Are you more demanding, perfectionist because of your Christian faith? If you are, then that's because your faith is informing you. It's changing you from the inside. And people, without being told, will know there is something different about you, even if it's not made explicit. They might not even put words to it themselves, but you might be the kind of person they would come to with a problem before they would go to someone else. You might be the kind of person they would trust. You might be the kind of person, they might not like you, but they might respect you more than someone else. And the great thing about being a Christian is even if you're a really bad Christian, you know you can be forgiven. If you fall, you can get up again with God's help. And if you fall, there will be someone else to help you up. So it's about being almost not quite invisible, but low-key. Now, I felt, when I was at university and all these evangelicals were asking me, and so why do you believe in Mary? And why do you believe in praying for people who are dead? And why do you believe in the body of Christ when it's bread? And why do you believe? And why do you believe? Their questions weren't hostile, but they were good questions. And they made me re-examine every aspect of my faith to see, actually, is it rational? Do I just believe this because I've always believed it? Or is there actually some real basis for what I believe? And I went from the ground upwards, rebuilding what I believe and explaining it in different terms so that others could understand. Maybe then it's no accident that when I was looking for a career after university, I didn't think of becoming a priest, but I met the Redemptorists. And the Redemptorists seemed able to explain faith in everyday life, in ordinary words, without kind of huge theology or without making it too complicated. And one, I thought, I like this, and two, I thought, I can do this, or I could do this with some help. And that's the path I took. But it's not for everyone. My previous parish before I came to Luxembourg was in Edinburgh. If you've been to Edinburgh, you know it's a beautiful city. It has the biggest arts festival in the world, It's every year, the whole month of August, and has got, I think there are about 16 festivals now. The Art Festival, the Folk Festival, the Jazz Festival, the Book Festival, the Official Festival, which is kind of high culture, the Fringe Festival, which is the huge part. Myself and 3 of my Redemptorist brothers took over a church that was about to close because everybody had moved out of the city. It was right in the centre of Edinburgh, just off the Royal Mile. And it was not to run a parish, but to run a church as a missionary project, to reach people that ordinary churches did not reach, to find new ways of not just telling people about Christ, but drawing people in to the community, drawing people into the church, not to make them Christian or Catholic necessarily, but to help enrich their lives in some way. And the project was hugely exciting. For 10 years, every year, without fail, we were on the news during the festival because we'd done something that we thought was simple, but wasn't happening elsewhere. And the success of it was not being too religious. It sounds funny, but for example, one hugely popular event, we said, confession is good for the soul. Are you burdened with guilt? Do you need to get something off your chest? Confess to an experienced Catholic priest, open to all faiths and none. Now, you open the door, someone says, can I talk to you? You don't say, are you Catholic? Are you Christian? You know, what's your religion? You say, yes, come in. And then they might confess something, and if they're Catholic, you might give them absolution. If they're Christian, you'll pray with them. If they're no religion or another religion, you might give them words of encouragement. So it's ordinary. But when we called it confession, the media went mad. The BBC sent an atheist correspondent to confession. They said to us beforehand, can we send one of our interviewers? And he's an atheist. And we thought, well, if it goes wrong, we're not allowed to say anything because we can't repeat anything we hear in confession. And he could accuse us of anything. And then we thought, well, actually, they've asked us. They needn't ask us. Someone could just come, you know, without telling us they're a reporter or a journalist. So we said, yes, okay. So this guy came to confession, and his colleague was in a cafe just round the corner, waiting to see what his atheist friend would say. So the friend came back, and he said, how did it go? What was confession like? And the guy, David, said, I've just had one of the best experiences of my life. I'm still an atheist, but I can't describe to you how different I feel. Now, it wasn't me he came to, it was one of my colleagues, but how interesting. It didn't have to be a religious confession, but it was making available to others the richness that we people of faith have, those of us that are people of faith. So you've no idea, when living your ordinary life, how you might be giving encouragement, enlightenment, and hope to others, without even mentioning the name of Jesus. When I did wear my religious collar, it was a nightmare. Whenever I went to a party, or a gathering, or a meeting, immediately someone would come up and say, oh, I don't believe in all that rubbish. Oh, okay. And after a while, after several years of this, I just said, fine, you don't have to. Well, aren't you supposed to try and persuade me? I said, no. You know, if you want to argue, find someone to argue with, but I'm not going to argue. But if you want to ask questions, I'll answer them. You know, I'm not there to have things thrown at because I'm a Christian, but I will genuinely accompany anyone who wants to ask questions, and equally, I must demonstrate by my life that I am open to other opinions and to other wisdoms, without saying that mine is always the best, because God is bigger than the church and is bigger even than religion. So in your workplace, in our workplace, we are humble, not claiming we have all the truth. Our evangelization is implicit By looking at us and talking with us, people will sense something of what we believe. And by our actions, I'm so proud that it's winding down, there were over 90 members of our church community at St. Alphonse working at the refugee centre in Gasperish, for example. I think it's no accident. Now, many people have worked at the refugee centres who are not religious, or not professedly religious. But I was so pleased knowing that our community was helping those in greatest need, because that is what they thought it was right to do. And I'm sure that was informed by their Christian faith. I'll finish. I could go on forever, but I will finish with a story about a friend of mine who was a follower, who was a little sister of Jesus, the order, one of the orders founded by Frère Charles de Foucauld. And she wore the denim habit and the blue veil, and she's South African, and she was in Paris learning French. And she was dressed as a religious sister. And the other members of her class were quite hostile. They clearly didn't like religion, and they clearly didn't like the Catholic faith at all. And they used to question her at the end of class in a hostile manner. Why do you believe all that rubbish? You should be intelligent. Put that behind you. It's superstition. And eventually it became too much for her, and she just started crying. And they were all really shocked. And they backed off. And then they started talking to her more gently and asking more respectful questions, and became actually, some of them, good friends. She couldn't express with words. She couldn't evangelize. That wasn't her gift. Her gift was just to be with people and to live her faith in the gentle, simple way that she lived it. And the message there for me and for us: who are you? How best, according to your personality and the gifts you have, do you live your faith gently, truthfully, sincerely, helpfully with those around you? There's no right answer, and there's no wrong answer, because there are many, many individual answers. And living our Christian faith, living Christian faith in the world of work, even with our families, with those we meet, is always a discernment. Trying something, if you go too far, pulling back. Trying something else, if that works, get on with it. But always know, at the end of the day, the work is not being done by us. It's being done by Christ in us, and us in Christ. C'est tout.
Thank you very much for these views, for your personal take on these questions. And I would like to turn to the room and see if, having heard the account of Father Ed, you have maybe some points that you would like to raise, or maybe a question about what was said here. Sorry, ladies first.
Hello. I would like to take you a little bit further and ask if you have any suggestions for those of us who live or we have family who don't believe or who have totally different convictions. How do you compromise there? Because that's a totally different story from work. Okay, maybe it's totally two different.
I think that is the hardest question of all, because our family are the ones that know us the most, who know our weaknesses the most, and they know what winds us up the most. And they can reach the weakest part of us by just a word or a gesture. We don't pretend that we're someone else. They know us for who we are. And I find that the most disarming thing is to simply say, this is what I believe. I don't fully understand it myself. I am a bit of a hypocrite because I don't live the gospel as fully as I should. No one does, and no one can. The only person that could is the one who died and rose again. So with family, it's a delicate negotiation. To respect their views, but never give in just because they're bullying you, or they put you down every time you make faith, or they laugh at you, and that's a common experience at work. You feel that people, are laughing, that they think you're a bit simple, that religion is for the unintellectual, and that it's not really a respectable thing to have. Now, family, it could be overt hostility. They're very much against it. Don't bring that rubbish into this house. That's difficult. Another area of great difficulty in family is parents that believe, and then teenagers especially. And now with the teenager getting younger and younger, it might be 8 or 9-year-olds saying, I don't believe in that anymore. And it's a balance between respecting their non-belief, but standing for what you do believe, and saying, well, I do believe it. And trusting that God is in there somewhere, that what they reject or don't understand as children or teenagers, they might come to appreciate as they get older. Again, there's no right or wrong answer, but don't let it wear you down. Because another image Jesus uses is that faith is the pearl, the precious pearl, the jewel of great price that you find, and you hold on to it because you know what it's worth. And other people might say, oh, that's rubbish, throw it away, or there are more important things in life than blah, blah, blah in prayer, and do you believe that? No. Seek always to go deeper into your own faith and live it for others. So if your faith makes you more patient with your family, more loving with your family, more truthful, more sincere with your family, then you're onto something really, really good. But it's the area of great struggle. I do appreciate that. The teenage thing, that's I could talk about that for a long time as well. I worked in youth ministry for 15 years, and that was really, really interesting. They didn't want to know what you believed. They wanted to know how sincerely you believed it. I was once wearing my religious habit, and I was in a school, and they were 15, 16-year-olds, and they were quite hostile, not nasty, but, they were, oh, blah, 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 blah. And so I spoke for about 40 minutes about religion, some aspect of religion. And then I said, any questions? And a hand went up. What do you wear under that thing? I was wearing, they were at a completely different level. And not long after that, I stopped wearing the habit, and I just engaged in conversation. And they asked me whatever they wanted to ask, and I would answer as truthfully as I could. Might not be an answer, but it's my attempt at an answer.
First, thank you. Knowing you and knowing the community, so it's always wonderful to see you in the church, really giving your testimony every time. But faith is something not always easy, not always constant, mainly for me. And so I would have been happy to hear your difficulties.
How long have you got? My own difficulties are, now I'm going to talk about my mother for 1 second. My mum she's born in 1933, so she's just 84, and she is intensely religious. She prays for an hour every day, and she will ask me, how is so-and-so? Now, so-and-so is someone I asked her to pray for 3 years ago. I've forgotten about them, but she still prays for them every day. And about 2 years ago, she's very, very ill now, and she said, Ed, she said, do you think it's all true? God and prayer and everything. And I was really surprised. This is my mum, the real religious one. I'm far less religious than she is. And I said, well, Mum, I don't know. I think it is, and I live as though it is. So I think it is, but I'm not 100% certain. And she said, well, that's what I think as well. Now, it's a sign of maturity to be able to live with ambiguity. It's tempting to want things black and white. I believe 100%. I don't believe 100%, but actually life is more shades of grey. It's much more complex. So there are times when I think, have I wasted my life? I've helped people. Well, I could have done that in 100 different ways. But I do believe in the spiritual side of life and the richness that the life of faith offers. I can't explain terrible things that happen to good people. Equally, I'm not always in tune with especially the moral teaching of our church. I'm hugely proud of huge aspects of our church's teaching, and Pope Francis has been a huge breath of fresh air in his focus on the poorest and the neediest. Now that brings me to another aspect about faith that's been buzzing around in my brain the past 3 or 4 months. There are a series of lectures, I've mentioned them at church, on the BBC in Britain every year. They're named after the founder of the BBC, the kind of one of the leading, the first controllers of the BBC, I forget the name, the Reith Lectures. And this year's is about identity. And the speaker said, actually, I've come to realise that faith, that religious practice, is less about orthodoxy, what you believe and how you explain it, and more about orthopraxy, what religious people do. So, Saint Alphonse, people are coming to the church. It's not because God is explained or there are insights there that there are nowhere else. They like what they experience when they get there. Some people are lonely and coming for community. Some people like singing. Some people like intellectual dialogue. Some people just want a sense of belonging. Some people sense an atmosphere there they don't get anywhere else. And it's the same in any religious place. And I like this idea because it explains why we have such a mix of people and beliefs in any of our churches or places of worship. So my own faith is somewhere in there. You know, it's a mix of my belief in God, of my desire to build community, a desire to help those in greatest need, and somewhere in there is a lost little boy, you know, that's looking for his own kind of salvation. I don't believe in hell as much as I used to, or at least I think that hell is what we experience in this life rather than a place of punishment in the next life. So I do have my doubts all the time, and they're ordinary human doubts. You don't get different ones just because you're a priest. You know, I don't know if the bread turns into the body of Christ or the wine turns into the blood of Christ. I believe it does. I can't prove it because a scientific proof wouldn't be appropriate for a religious belief. So I've got all the usual doubts. And every now and again I think, is there enough to hold me? And every time I have a crisis, so far, I've come through it. No guarantee for life. Okay.
Read about Jesus.
Yeah.
He comes across as being, like you said, sometimes divisive, sometimes very open and black. It's kind of
Would you mind so that everybody...
Yeah.
The question is Jesus divisive, or is he all-embracing, love, power? I believe he's a combination of all those. What's the question?
Yeah.
How would you address it?
Now where to begin with that one? Yeah.
The question was...
Yes. For someone all-loving, for someone all-truthful, for someone believing in the power of God, that's one thing. But for someone like that to be in a world that is of different opinion, it is going to cause division. And he said, depending on the translation, do not imagine I come to bring peace. I come rather to bring a sword or to bring division. Because if you speak truth in a milieu where truth is not accepted, you're going to suffer. If you do loving things in an environment that is not loving, if you try and give help to the poor when the prevailing culture is very consumerist and you threaten the vested interests, you will cause division. So division in itself in those terms isn't bad. It just highlights the differences in human nature. So Jesus was divisive, but not in a bad way. He was divisive because of the world he came into, was not as it could have been, in my opinion.
One final question, I think, depending on how long the answer is.
Thank you, Father. This is an economist question. When I lived in the US, I had Mormon friends, and for them it was quite straightforward. What they had to do with their income, they gave 10% of their income to the church, and it went on to the poor. I think Muslims are also very generous with the money they have. Jesus lived in a very humble way. Many of us here have the opportunity or the luxury of living in rather comfortable circumstances. And the question to which I do not really have an answer is, what should I contribute to Christian or Catholic charities? What would be a good yardstick? I'm a little bit lost there. Thank you.
See me privately afterwards. We can come to some arrangement. It is a really good question, and we're in, as you say, an affluent society, relatively affluent, and now there was a gospel about this recently. It's not where your money is, it's where your heart is, because your money will follow your priorities in life. So if your priorities really are those in need, then you will feel drawn towards sharing your resources with it. Now, there's two different levels of this. One is, what do we do as individuals? And it's a dilemma that presents itself every day at the doors of the church. There are homeless people, and there are beggars who are not homeless, that stand at the door of the church looking pathetic. Some of them are in genuine need, whether because of addiction-related problems, or the way life has treated them, or that they haven't coped very well. Others are there in organised groups, and by and large we know who they are. Now, individuals feel bad if they don't give to a person who's holding out a hand for money. But actually, the solution, there will never be a complete solution, but the solution is more structural than individual. So how do we relate to organisations that help homeless people, for example? Now, tithing is the Old Testament way of giving a tenth, and that's what American, especially evangelicals, but taken in some Catholic churches as well, where you give 10% of your income. Now, what we do, we respond to emergencies, and if there's a hurricane somewhere or an earthquake or something like that, but we've yet to have a longer-term strategy, because the church does not exist for itself. It's not a club for its members. It exists for the rest of the world. And that's something we need to negotiate between ourselves as well as in our individual lives. So it's not an answer of a percentage. It's how do we relate to the world outside. And it's got to be an ongoing conversation. If we were a very wealthy church in Luxembourg, say if St. Alphonse had millions in the bank, we could give $1 million and not notice it. The movement in the States, which is really interesting, is sacrificial giving. It's giving till it hurts, whether individually or as a community. And that's something to be explored. And we're just at the beginning of it in the English-speaking community. It's not an adequate answer, but it's all I can say at the moment.
Okay, maybe we have one more question for this evening.
Give me a difficult question. Really hard question. I was only joking.
No, I don't think it's very hard, but listening to you, so I have the impression you've grown a kind of a soft or let's say not the aggressive approach as a Christian towards colleagues or friends, more showing by example or wanting them to ask questions or getting interested by the way you act or you are as a person. But we live in a time where generally our faith is being attacked more and more. People know less and less about what Christianity is or Catholicism is, especially the young people. And everything is going faster, and people don't have time to think about religion. So I was expecting you promoting a more proactive approach as a Christian in this environment, as in the current environment. So just Is there? I mean, wouldn't it be more effective? I mean, the evangelicals do that, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
They are also more successful, I think, in terms of converting or bringing people to faith, especially in third world or emerging countries. So, shouldn't we follow a more, marketing approach as they do?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I appreciate the question. My PhD, which is not finished, has run into the sand at the moment, but is ongoing, is how Apple can save the church. And it's looking at Apple from, I won't go into it now, but it's looking at the world out there, the world of commerce, the world of marketing, the world of consumerism, and saying, what can the church learn from this that will not corrupt what the church is and how it operates? Now, I have no problem being more proactive. If someone talks to me about the wealth of the church, I will say, where is that wealth and how is it being used? And is there any other organization in the whole world that is present in the poorest of the poor places in the same way as the church is? And how is it resourced in these poor places except by the wealthier places where the church is? Secondly, if they say, oh, you must be stupid to believe in religion, I would say, we're believing something that has 5,000 years of wisdom and experience behind it. We're not just opening a book that an angel said something and therefore we believe it. We're tapping in to an ancient tradition, so the anti-intellectual thing doesn't wash with me either. I read a criticism. The cathedral in Los Angeles has put sprinklers outside so that homeless people won't sleep in the environs of the cathedral. And there were all these liberals writing to the paper saying how disgusting this was, they should be more like Jesus. And I was absolutely furious, because the same cathedral was involved in homeless projects, in housing homeless people, and I wanted to say to these do-good liberals that were writing in, will you be there to pick up the syringes and the excrement and wash the urine away from all around the church building? And do you want to encourage people to have to use an outdoor toilet in public like that? Or would you rather work in the less glamorous side of things, in providing proper facilities for people? So I have no problem being proactive. It depends on where the opposition is coming from. And in a great phrase that I say to myself over and over again, and it's often with aggressive people who want to put their own belief, or lack of it, over and against our religious belief. G.K. Chesterton said, when people stop believing in something, they don't believe, when they stop believing in something, they don't believe in nothing, they believe in anything. He says, oh, I don't believe all that religious rubbish. And I hear it sometimes and I'm sympathetic, of course, when, say, someone, they're not religious, but they want me to do a funeral, which I will gladly do. It's a human thing. We want to pay respect to our dead. And after having rejected the Christian explanation, they say, my mother's a star in the sky now, shining down on us. Well, if there's no scientific basis for faith in Jesus Christ, there's certainly not for human beings becoming stars and shining down. It's a nice sentiment. It's understandable. It's human. And I don't slap them down and say that's rubbish. But I think, hang on. So I can say right, what do you believe in? If someone says that our belief is not rational. So I can be very proactive, and we can be and should be proactive, not defensive. Because defensive means we're worried. We're not secure in what we actually believe. We are so secure because it's well-founded and has history behind it. And some of the greatest thinkers over the centuries have been Christian thinkers and religious thinkers. Okay. So I don't like conflict, which is why I present the gentler side first. But we should all be prepared for directly conflictual situations and to answer gently, truthfully, sincerely, and humbly. And stick the knife in really gently so they don't even feel it going in. That's just my bad side.
Well, that's a very nice conclusion, I think, for the evening. We would like to thank you again for having come here. Let me... Sorry. here, this is from the committee and the TheoBar, to thank you for your time and for coming to speak to us. Thank you, everybody, for coming here, all the new faces and the familiar ones as well. Have a lovely evening. Thank you.